Hello everyone, and wherever you are in the world today, thank you for joining us. So I'm Tim Eldridge, I'm Vice President of IOSH, and I'd like to welcome you once again to our series of COVID-19 webinars. So IOSH, which is the Institution of Occupational Safety and Health, is a chartered body and the world's largest membership organisation for health and safety professionals. We have over 47,000 members in 130 countries working in nearly every sector. And our vision is a safer, healthier world of work for everyone. Now, these weekly webinars focus on sharing knowledge, experience, and expertise, and they cover many professional, practical, and evidence-based aspects of managing occupational safety and health during this pandemic. So today is the 12th in our series, and this IOSH webinar will focus on the role of line managers in returning to work safely. The responsibility of OSH professionals is becoming clearer, but are our leaders and line managers being given the full support they need, and do they understand the implications of not managing their people's health and safety? So in the next 60 minutes, our speakers will deliver a series of presentations for you. And to begin, I'll be sharing a preview of new findings from a recent IOSH and YouGov survey of 700 decision makers on the responsibilities of line managers in looking after employee health and safety. Following this, we'll hear from Francke, who's the CEO of the Chartered Management Institute, who'll present on the importance of involving managers in returning to the workplace post-lockdown. She'll consider the professional role managers have in crises like this one, their formal responsibilities, the duties of care they have towards staff, and how they can and should collaborate with disciplines such as occupational safety and health. And finally, we'll hear from Parker-Tantush, who's the head of health and safety at the Co-op Group, who will provide examples of how Co-op has overseen its transition to a new business as usual for some staff, and how line managers are continuing to care for those members of staff who are still home-based. And then, as Ben said, we'll wrap up with Q&A session and try to get through as many of your questions as possible. So again, a reminder, if you do have questions as we go through, put them into the Q&A and I'll do my best to answer as many as we can at the end. So I'll just briefly talk about the YouGov survey. So IOSH commissioned a YouGov in 2019-2020 to conduct a survey of health and safety decision makers in business. And in this webinar, we're going to give you an exclusive preview of the findings. So we had nearly 700 people take part in the survey, which asked a series of questions about the role that line managers plan in their organizations in safety and health management. And we asked how these companies equip their managers to fulfill their OSH duties. And in this report, we'll examine the importance of line managers in occupational safety and health. So these employees who really carry the burden of responsibility for ensuring their teams are tasked safely are on the front line of workplace safety and health. So how the employer makes sure they're equipped to play this role is one of the most important duties they have. And this survey and report deliberately focuses on the importance of management training in this. I can tell you that the report, which we will publish next week, reveals that there are wide discrepancies in how organizations equip their managers. But we'll outline clearly the steps they must take to ensure their managers reach the essential levels of competence to keep their people safe from harm. So, preview of the findings. So we interviewed 698 people, as I said, all with decision-making responsibilities in health and safety. There was a spread across job role, industry sector, and size of company. And our findings found widespread consensus in response to certain questions, but wide discrepancies with other replies. One thing our participants did agree on, 96% in fact, is that line managers are important in ensuring the people they directly line manage are safe and healthy in the workplace. It's encouraging that there's universal recognition among those surveyed that line managers are important in managing people's safety at work. So what do businesses say when someone loses their life, is injured, or falls ill because of what they're doing at work? We asked whether respondents felt management failure was responsible for accidents, And there really was a mixed response, as you can see there, with a quarter saying rarely, 15% sometimes, and only 6% always or often. Now, if managers are saying so important to managing people safely at work, why did so few of our respondents believe they were responsible when things were going wrong? Now, we have to be careful when drawing conclusions from such a finding, but it does call into question how responsible and accountable managers are seen to be when carrying out their duty of care. IOSH and YouGov have then asked participants about how they ensure their managers have the right level of skills, knowledge, and understanding to manage people safely, and in particular about the access these employees have to health and safety training. So there you can see more than a half of respondents, so 53%, said they had invested in health and safety training for managers, mainly from an external provider, with IOSH's Managing Safely course being the most popular. But 1 in 5 said they had no form of health and safety training at all for their line managers. So this suggests the remainder rely on internal resources such as a health and safety officer or freely available open source information to train their managers. And finally, we asked those companies that did invest in health and safety training for their managers about the reasons why. And more than 4 in 5 said such health and safety courses were driving benefits to their business. And these benefits include improved organization-wide safety awareness culture, active staff involvement to improve safety in the workplace, and an enhanced reputation within our supply chain. So let's look at why, beyond legal compliance, that health and safety and training for people managers is so important in an organization. Now, there's a natural hierarchy in organizations that gets more defined the more employees it has. And co-workers, each tier of a business, have an important role to play in creating work culture that protects its people. So what are these different levels of knowledge and actions required at each tier of the organizational structure? So in short, here we have the board and senior leadership need to set policy and strategy to deliver it. Those in heads of department, they need to ensure that actions taken, of course, deliver the strategy and apply the resources needed. And first line managers need to deliver the actions on the ground and ensure that all employees and contractors are fully engaged with health and safety policies and strategies. And this group of people really deliver, don't they, against the policies and strategies. Now, of course, in any hierarchical structure, the information needs between the different levels addressed in reports and data collection are different. First line managers need to know that controls are being implemented. Heads of department or middle managers need to know that resources are sufficient and that systems are operating smoothly and effectively. And those running the company need to have assurances that their policy is right and that the strategy is effective. At each level, different performance indicators are required to do this as well. So this is why IOSH develops awareness training courses for every level of an organization. Skills, knowledge, and understanding of occupational safety and health are required, of course, by people at every level of an organization. But our survey with YouGov focused in particular on the training and skills of these frontline managers. Why? Because we believe that it's a vital investment because of the delivery role of frontline managers. And also, it is clear to us that there are wide discrepancies between organizations when it comes to getting this right. There are, of course, many elements required for an organization to manage health and safety well and to ensure that the responsibility for protecting people in the workplace is shared. And our report, which will be published next week, as I said, will talk these through. We'll talk about legal and business principles, organizational governance and performance, competency and culture. But in particular, the paper will examine the importance of health and safety training for line managers, because IOSH strongly believes that the OSH competencies of people managers is central to embedding a safe and healthy work culture. It's a vital investment and the quality of the training is paramount. It's probably 3 days out of a line manager's work schedule, which will save countless hours, costs, and most importantly, the trauma of workplace injury, illness, or fatality down the line. And as we seek to return people to workplaces safely following the easing of lockdown measures, we believe the publication is very, very timely. Health and safety and awareness training for managers has a range of business benefits, as we've mentioned, including the understanding of how occupational safety and health contributes to powering your business reputation and brand. It helps to protect your assets against adverse events and unforeseen costs. It builds a positive culture, supporting the development of brand and reputation by demonstrating you're an ethical company in a world where these things are becoming increasingly important. And safety and health training supporting company ethics that will make you a more attractive employer, especially to the young who actively seek this in their employer of choice. And these training courses can help you to build an effective management team that will drive efficiency by clarifying who is responsible for what and when. And this makes failure less likely to occur. So in conclusion, as we enter in an uncertain period for organisations following the easing in many countries of the COVID-19 restrictions, ensuring managers are equipped and capable of managing the health and safety of their teams will build their organisation's resilience by delivering outcomes such as these. So thank you for listening, and as mentioned, we'll go through any questions we have at the end. But now it gives me great pleasure to introduce Anne Francke. Anne is Chief Executive of the Chartered Management Institute. She started her career at Procter & Gamble and has held senior executive positions at Mars, Boots, Yale and BSI. In 2019, Anne was awarded an OBE for services to workplace equality. Anne is an expert on gender balance in the workplace and speaks frequently in the media and conferences on this and other management topics. Her book on gender balance, Create a Gender Balanced Workplace, published in September 2019. Anne also authored the Financial Times Guide to Management and has been named in the top 100 women to watch in the 2015 Female FTSE Cranfield Report. And she's awarded the MEMCOM Award for Outstanding Leadership of a UK professional body in 2016. Anne also holds several board positions and 5 honorary doctorates for her work in management and leadership. So Anne, it's an absolute pleasure to hand over to you. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim, and I'm delighted to be here and welcome everybody. So I want to make 5 points in the brief talk I'm going to give you, and I want to start by echoing what Tim said about managers' responsibility for health and safety in the workplace. And the good news is that according to our surveys at CMI, managers do accept their responsibility. So in the current situation, this was a survey of over 1,000 managers, 83% were very or fairly concerned about the health and safety of their employees returning to work. And almost 70% had had a team member express concern to their manager about the safe return to work. Now, among the most common concerns were contracting the virus, the working in close proximity to others, childcare responsibilities, given that so many schools globally are shut down, and the use of public transport. So these are the 4 areas that garnered the most concern. Now, when it comes to ensuring safe workplaces during the return to work, almost 2/3 of the managers we asked were confident that they could implement social distancing requirements. And they were confident about doing staggered arrival and departure times, reconfiguring their workplaces for social distancing, and regulating entry points. And they felt they would need about 1 to 2 weeks to implement these. And of course, as Tim says, training in these measures is absolutely vital. But I'm now going to turn to something for my remaining 4 points that I think is as important as what we've just been discussing. And that's to share with you how management and leadership has shifted in this crisis. These are very fundamental shifts which can lead to better management and leadership in the future if they are kept up when we return, and they can make a positive impact on management and leadership. The first point I'd like to share with you is that we found in our surveys that actually most people, and there are millions around the world who have found themselves working from home, most people are happier working from home. So this is because of more family time, less commuting time, but we did a survey that examined all 6 aspects of workplace happiness with engaging works, and we saw a significant improvement, just under 2,000 people asked, across all 6 parameters, from job satisfaction to well-being, reward, and recognition. And if we unpick this, we believe that there are 4 main aspects of this shift that are driving it, and these are the aspects we should all seek to preserve as we emerge from this crisis. The first, and we are a testament to this, is the absolute speed and global nature of the digital transformation we've all undergone. This has actually resulted in more communication and more global communication. And using these digital tools, we discover that it's a great leveler. We're all in the same size box. We are able to hear from everybody. We can all ask questions on the chat function. It kind of eliminates the power playing and the jockeying for position next to the boss, because we're all here on the screen. Now, the second thing is this work from home revolution, flexible working, has convinced the skeptics that actually you can work from home. We have chairmen saying, I never thought I could do this. I never thought I could chair a board meeting from home. We have CEOs of banks and other large companies saying, I never thought I could lead the company working from home and have everybody working from home. It has forced us to focus on outputs, not office hours. And actually the speed at which this has happened led one senior partner in a law firm to tell me that she had actually delivered her 2030 digital transformation strategy over the weekend. Now, this work from home environment opens the door for a greater inclusive and diverse workforce, especially if we embrace blended working when we come out of the crisis. Our survey shows the vast majority of people working from home want a blended return to work. And this in turn will help employers implement safe social distancing measures if they do blended working. The fact that we need to travel less opens up more possibilities to have people in other jurisdictions and not just in physical proximity join teams. And this too adds to the ability to be diverse and inclusive. It makes it easier for working parents, and many women are working parents, and it also makes it easier for disabled colleagues. So that's the first very important point to hold on to. The second point is how we're communicating with each other. Our communication is much more human and inclusive. This crisis affects everybody equally, so we are all in the same boat. And we are finding out more about the people we lead and manage. We are seeing into people's homes, we're seeing their pets and their children. It's more informal, and that's creating a more genuine and human connection. When we ask these days how our employees are, we actually really mean it. And we're more tolerant of things going wrong, a child interrupting a webinar or somebody losing their connectivity. It happens to us all, and we're just more accepting of the human aspects of life. And that means that we're becoming more empathetic. And this is a great attribute to add to our management and leadership repertoire, because good managers and leaders are empathetic. And actually, as part of this, it means that we are expanding our definition of health and safety to include not just physical safety in the workplace, but very importantly, mental and emotional safety, as well as financial safety and risk. So our definition, and this is my third point on this change in management and leadership, our definition of health and safety is greatly expanded. It includes mental health and safety, physical health and safety, as I said, and that is whether we are in the office or working from home, making sure that workers have the right kit, but also that we are trained and able to deal with mental health issues. And the vast majority in our surveys have shown that they have had to do this. It's going to become much more important going forwards. And many companies have recognized this, and they're getting much more proactive in putting training in place, not only on physical health and safety, but mental health and safety, and they're putting more well-being programs in place. This can be everything from virtual chocolate making to virtual yoga. It can involve digital and other training initiatives, and we know people are very interested in training while they're at home. And there's a very positive focus on asking employees more often and regularly in what their views are about their happiness, what their views are about returning to work. And that employee centricity is new. And as one chairman told me, employees in this crisis have risen to the center of that stakeholder wheel. And that is an incredibly important shift, and one that we should endeavor to keep post-crisis. My final and last point is we've all had to embrace agile decision-making. If the mantra of this crisis has been do, don't stew, we don't have time for endless deliberations and dithering and lots of hierarchy and governance. We've had to get it done, and we've had to get it done fast. And that means we get it done, we learn, and we iterate. And that makes us more agile. And there's a lot less focus on pouring through lengthy risk registers and a lot more focus on dealing with the practical consequences of this crisis. And that means that we have put more trust in our employees and our managers to decide and deliver. So this is a crisis, and it has been a very unfortunate global event for all of us. But I believe that COVID culture, certain aspects of COVID culture when it comes to management and leadership, can create long-term competitive advantage. And the best companies that embrace these new ways of working will emerge stronger from this crisis. And as you say, never waste a good crisis. And I believe that there is a lot of silver lining about how we manage and lead others. So thank you very much. And now back to Tim.
Well, thank you, Anne. It's a fantastic presentation and some really interesting food for thought there. So just as a reminder, everyone, I'm sure the questions are being generated in your minds for Anne. So please click on the Q&A and we'll come to those at the end of the session. So now I'm delighted to introduce Sue Parker-Tantush, who is the Head of Health and Safety at the Co-op Group. Sue has led the health and safety transformation in the Co-op, driving change through improved collaboration across the co-op businesses and a positive safety culture through strong leadership. Her previous experience was with Kingfisher, the leading European DIY chain, where she was instrumental in breaking down barriers between businesses across 10 countries and sharing best practices. Sue prides herself on being a strategic leader with an understanding based on her experience in various roles beyond safety, including retail operations, risk management, internal audit, and general compliance. Sue certainly hasn't noticed any drop in workload during lockdown, but has used the lack of a social life to sort out her overgrown garden at the weekend. Probably not the only one, Sue. So delighted to hand over to Sue, who's going to talk to us now. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, and thank you so much for joining this webinar. Hopefully what I'm going to be sharing is a bit of a case study for all the points that Anne raised. I want to touch on some lessons learned, the strong leadership messaging from the co-op that's been very important, how we've supported colleagues who suddenly found themselves working at home, and also how we're starting to transition now into the new normal. So that will be colleagues who actually will actively be returning to an office, for example. So I'll start by briefly telling you who the co-op are. So quick overview here. I will be sharing the slides with everybody afterwards. So the co-op group is a cooperative society. So we are work for the common good effectively, and we have our origins back in 1844. We are a large organisation across the UK, and there are many cooperatives internationally. In our own cooperative, we currently have 70,000 colleagues. And we're a very campaigning organisation. We've campaigned on modern slavery, loneliness, and tackling violent crime against shop workers. And we've become particularly involved during this crisis on things like making sure that children are fed over summer holidays, that we have volunteer armies ready to support people who are struggling and don't have an income, for example. So we've really risen to the challenge, I think, in this crisis. Who are our colleagues? Well, that's diverse as well. So we have key workers who work in retail, logistics and funeral care. And we also have office-based colleagues. So we have 19 corporate centres, for example, and 4,000 colleagues were in our main head office, which is based in the northwest of England in Manchester. So it's a real blend. I thought I'd start by sharing some of the things we've learned during this crisis. And as leaders, how we've had to adapt to change. We have definitely learned new ways of working. We had lots of layers of governance to implement new systems, for example, and we've learned that those don't need to be in place and they've had to go. We've had to make things happen quickly. An example of that is in building our external relationships. So we needed PPE, for example, for our funeral care colleagues. Now, in the past, that would have been a long, drawn-out process of several suppliers, and they come in for coffee in head office. And we need to work more in a more agile way, as Anne referenced, to make sure that we can supply our colleagues with everything that they need to operate. And we've made the most of relationships we already have. So in the UK, we have what's called a primary authority relationship, which fields inquiries for enforcement. So we've made good use of that. And we found that communication was quite challenging for our leaders as well. Government advice in the UK was constantly changing. We had to change the messaging all the time. We had to use things like Teams to message. We had to have video messages from our leaders on a regular basis and not just rely on email, for example, as a source, which is now becoming quite old-fashioned, to be honest. But we also had to keep revisiting messaging, and that was really key, because a lot of our key workers, for example, the new normal became extremely normal for them over the 3 months that they were working. So we had to constantly remind them about, for example, social distancing measures. And we had to scale back business as usual. And again, I think Anne referenced how we've really learned some lessons here. And one of the things we've learned is, again, about layers of audit and check. Were all of those checks necessary? We had classroom-based inductions, for example, in logistics sites. If you then try and layer on information about the COVID virus, are we giving people too much information to digest? So again, that has been one of the changes we've made. And we are revisiting those things now and saying, actually, do we need to go back to the way we were, or shall we carry on in the new normal? Supporting colleagues has been key. Just going to quick drink. Now, the message here has been very, very focused on well-being. Messaging from our leaders has been absolutely key. We've had things like Wellbeing Wednesdays, where a new topic is discussed and is available for all colleagues with advice and support. We've looked at specific toolkits. People are very frightened in this crisis. People were very stressed. They were stressed because they weren't used to working at home all day. They were trying to balance childcare. And of course, in this horrendous time, we had colleagues who were suffering bereavement. So we produced lots of toolkits for those people, and leaders would make sure they were available to every single colleague. And then the right messaging from the top was key as well. For the first time, we were seeing into our leaders' homes as well, our CEO's home, and the strong message again about welcoming colleagues, cats, dogs, and children to meetings. You know, that if that message comes from the top, that makes it okay. So, you know, it's not unusual now to have, you know, a cat walk across a keyboard during a meeting, and no one minds, and you are getting to know people in a completely different way. You've got a real insight into their interests and who they are. And one of my team often sits in a team meeting with a 3-year-old on our lap. That's fine, you know, he makes some excellent contributions to the meeting as well. And then working safely as well. That's been quite a challenge for us. So we've got a wonderful office environment, lots of great equipment in there. How do we make sure colleagues are ergonomically safe in the office? How do we get specialist equipment to them if they already had that ordered for them? So we are completely changing our training on that. Our old training package was all about when you're working in the office, with an add-on about when you work at home. what we're doing now is just talking about when you're working. So again, it's that blended approach. So are you safe on your work surface? Because that might be a dining room table. Have you got the equipment you need? Do you need to raise your laptop, etc.? So it's taking the view that you might not be in that nice office environment, and then genuinely supporting flexible working. Some leaders are better at this than others. So it's making sure that all leaders understand, you know, a 5:30 meeting won't be appropriate for some people who've got children who have, you know, under 6-year-olds at the end of the day at 5:30 won't be easy to deal with, and you can't just tell them to go away. So make sure that the colleagues can work around your meeting schedule. Some colleagues are now putting on their email. If you get an email from me late at night, don't worry about it. I don't expect you to respond. This is how I'm working flexibly. So again, that's a very strong message from senior leaders. And then a challenge for those at home as well has been, how do you replicate the water cooler conversations? So one of the great things about working in the office has been, you know, you chat to your colleagues over coffee, you talk about the latest films. There's a risk when you're just working on Teams, for example, as we are, that every meeting is that rigid, regimented meeting, and there's no time for the chit chat that, you know, makes the day pass. And it's also a way of finding things out and gleaning information about what the teams in the co-op is doing. So we've really encouraged downtime together as well on Teams, popping coffees into people's diaries, virtual brews we're calling them. Teams meetings, you know, once a week. Teams meetings on Fridays tend to be in a lot of the across the co-op now. Virtual drinks at 5 o'clock, having a quiz, desert island dish, choose your favorite film. So it isn't all about that pure work. And then we have a new challenge being presented to us at the moment. So we have colleagues who are staying at home for the longer term, and that's great. And we have, as Anne alluded to, we are very much looking at blended working now, completely flexible, and that's come from the CEO directly. Steve Burrells has said that's how he's expecting us to work in the future. It suits people part-time in particular. It suits people who have you know, quite a commute, as a lot of our colleagues do, into Manchester. But we do need to transition back to normal. Part of that challenge for safety professionals, I think, and this will be in the office and outside of the office, is that all the health and safety risks are still available. You know, all that great work you were doing before COVID-19 hit us, that needs to be picked up and restarted, because we still need to look at the general health and safety of our colleagues. But we also need to address those colleagues who need to go back into the office or back into the workplace, who were, for example, colleagues who've been isolating for 3 months. How do we help them transition into this new normal? We are looking at things like pre-start visits. There are people who've been in this crisis in isolation because of you know, their personal circumstances or because of their health, who aren't used to going to shops where there's a one-way system or there is social distancing, and all of this is going to be quite a shock to them. So it's making sure that they've got the mental health support to make that transition, but that they also feel supported in the workplace. And that might be that we revisit their health and safety training so that they feel confident, that we get them into the workplace early just for a visit so they can meet their colleagues again and they can get over that initial shock about, I don't know what to expect. And then on the other side of the coin is how we manage expectations for colleagues who are desperate to get back in the office, and getting them to understand that what they missed isn't there at the moment. So again, back to that water cooler conversation. The chat we've got, you know, our office is on the screen, wonderful breakout areas. You know, we can't use those breakout areas at the moment in the way that we used to, because we need to make sure we've got very strict cleaning regimes. So that isn't there for them. So that's then supporting them again to either stay at home or to make sure that the blended working is going to be the best solution for them. Assurance around our cleaning regimes and that there won't be any hot desking anymore. And then I think that fear about how they're going to get to work in the workplace, we've had to look at how they'll arrive. Do we need to open more car parks? Do we provide masks? Giving them information about the local public transport, about that's working. And then another consideration is messaging for them and us. We have colleagues who we need to make sure the messaging is right, and that we're going to welcome you back into the office, and we're going to support you at home with, for example, the right equipment. But we always have to be mindful that there have been key worker colleagues across the corp who've worked right through this. And I think the important balance here will be recognising that everybody's experience through COVID-19 is valid. So whether you were working at home and the stress that may have given you, or whether you're a key worker, everybody's experience is valid and needs to be recognised. And then finally, an emerging risk, and I've touched on returning to business as usual, but an emerging risk will be things like track and trace now. So what do we do if we need to close an entire building or an entire store because somebody has realised that they have been in touch with a colleague who had the COVID virus? So that's the kind of emerging risks that we're planning for. And if you are looking at bringing colleagues back to the workplace in particular, that you will need to look after yourself. I think the final message really though from the co-op is that I agree with Anne, there have been real positives about this, and it really has taught us to work more slickly, to work without layers upon layers of governance where it's not needed. There are lots of things we can retain into the future, and that blended working for those colleagues who are able to is absolutely going to be the way forward. And that's me. Thank you, Tim.
Well, thanks, Sue. And again, great to hear some real life stories and experiences from you. And again, I'm pretty sure that's really given food for thought for our everyone on the webinar. So what we're going to do now is move into the Q&A session, which I'm going to facilitate for you. Now, I've already had a look, and we have a lot of questions already, which is fantastic. I will do my best to get through as many as I can for you. Please don't be offended if I don't come to yours, but I'm going to make a start, and I had one for Anne, which I'm just going to see if I can find this one. Anne, bear with me. Here we go. So there's a question for you from Linda, Anne, and her question is, has the concept of digitalization of the workplace taken into consideration operational teams and those who may not have access to computers or other digital means? Do you think this isolates them? And if so, how can this be overcome?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a good question, and there's a simple answer. The employer should supply everybody with digital communication capability, and I know of examples where exactly that has happened, where companies have had to roll out tablets and laptops very, very swiftly to make sure that all workers can still communicate whilst working from home. And equally, it isn't just employer organizations. A university vice chancellor told me that, you know, he had to go digital, 100% online learning model, and he had 400 students that didn't have any tablets. So it was his responsibility to make sure that they got their tablets. So again, I think this is it's a very pertinent question, but it is the employer's responsibility to make sure that the work from home employee has the means to communicate.
Thanks, Anne. I've got one here that I'm going to ask you, Sue. It's from John, and John says, as a construction site manager, now I know Sue, you're not in construction, but I do think it's relevant, which is how do I keep my contractors on site safe in central London who use public transport, living in hotels, etc. I also have to travel from Scotland to live in London. Apart from washing hands, etc., how do I keep up with ever-changing risks? And I thought I'd give you this to you because I know you have, lots of wide variety of workers all over the country working in different situations.
Well, we do have construction sites actually. We have construction specialists who look after the construction sites, but we have had to work. We build new stores. We put all of our building work on pause, but we did restart it about a month ago. And we did that by reaching out to all of our contractors and engaging with all of our suppliers and contractors on an individual basis to understand what their measures were, and then to give them some assurance about what we expected as well. And I think the balance had to be struck between making sure that it was a safe working environment, but also what is actually realistic. And the basic measures were the most important ones, to be honest. It was back to it, making sure washing hands, segregating people, creating bubbles on a construction site was really key. So almost as you would in an office, really. So making sure that segregation, and within those areas that the colleagues were construction colleagues were trained as well to understand what the expectation was of them, and then above all that constant reassurance. So we've been able to go back to work successfully and start our store rebuild.
Thanks, Sue. That's great. Next one, and I think I'll ask this of Anne, and it comes from Andrew, who says that we've been asked continuously about providing flexibility in our work during this time. However, management are not demonstrating such agility, and this is actively making employees unwell. Do you have any constructive ways of approaching this or dealing with it?
So that's very unfortunate, because that the managers that don't demonstrate, the senior managers and leaders that don't demonstrate that agility toward their workforce will suffer in the long term. They will not have as productive a workforce, and the well-being of the workforce will go down. And there is evidence that supports that. So my suggestion would be just to refer that particular manager to the plethora of information that is out there that supports the notion that actually workers that are allowed to work flexibly and are allowed to blend their work and life are more productive and deliver better results. We have, and I think they'll be circulated as part of the webinar material, a plethora of free resources and information where you can read up on lots of articles that support that. And I think that you should make them available and encourage your senior leadership team to read them, and then consider whether or not you ask your manager, Sue referenced these well-being Wednesdays. Why not initiate a discussion with all of your leadership team, including that reluctant manager, to talk about these things as a group, as a team, and try and come up with some sensible solutions.
Great advice. Thanks, Anne. Let's have a look what we've got. Keep them coming. This is great. I think we've already got over 50, so we'll keep going through these as much as we can. Thanks, Michael, who asks, does the panel think that our rapid decision making in a crisis, which, a really interesting point, we have been making some very rapid decisions, haven't we? If this continues under normal circumstances, do we think this will draw criticism and even civil claims due to the reduced detail and time spent on considering potential outcomes? I might ask that of you, Sue. I'm certainly conscious that the decision making has been very rapid, but what's your thoughts about that?
Well, I think it's a real balance, isn't it? So, for example, with rapid decision making for PPE, for funeral care, we had to make sure there was significantly more due diligence at the other end of the spectrum. So, additional checks on equipment, for example. So I think it's getting the balance right. We're not going to get rid of all of our governance layers. We'll just get rid of those where it was a decision on whether you need to make a decision or not. And I think we're very good at doing that in businesses. I think we just, you can get straight to the point and make some decisions really quickly. I mean, for an example, we've had IT projects that have been delivered in 3 months. when the planned projection was for a year, and the co-op loves meetings. Oh, does the co-op love a meeting? We don't need to have meetings about meetings. We just need to get on and make a decision, and then make sure there's a consensus, and then have the due diligence and your checks behind that.
Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you. Now I'm looking through this. There's a few questions coming in around vulnerable employees, employees who are shielding. So I'll ask this question. I'm not sure which one of you wants to pick this up, but Matthew asks, is there any guidance for organisations where shielding employees now wish to return to work? And so he's seen some policies from some organisations which continue to mandate furlough for these employees, while others are promoting their return. So clearly some confusion and inconsistency. Does either of you have any thoughts on
I don't mind picking up on that, because I've on the back of my slide, actually, on my slides, I've put some resources. I've been a little bit lazy, I haven't put the links, but I have put lots of resources on there, because that's the challenge we're going through at the moment. We're paying colleagues, our colleagues haven't lost pay at all until the end, and then we're continue to pay them, but they're still knocking on our door saying, please, can I come back to work? Because they're just desperate to do something and come out of shielding. Extremely vulnerable. Our stance at the moment is we just need the support of your GP, because we don't want to put you at risk. But those colleagues in particular, yeah, we are working through now. There is a lot of guidance out there, particularly from people like the Institute of Occupational Health, that's widely available. And we are working through that now. My biggest advice of all, though, is don't reinvent the wheel, because there are a lot of there's a lot of things you'll have in your business already, such as return to work processes, and you'll have probably occupational health providers, even if they're third party. And those are the things line managers are familiar with. So you need to layer on additional advice and support for line managers. But if you start from scratch on something completely new to help those colleagues transition, line managers won't recognize it. And there's a risk that some of the messaging will be lost.
If I could, I would only add one additional point, which is it is worth looking at what the job role is, because there are job roles that actually, as we've seen, can be done remotely. And it could very well be that a vulnerable employee could slightly switch their job role from something that they were doing before, where they had to go into an office, where now they might not need to do that. So if they were, for example, involved in serving customers, well, could they move to a remote customer service position and go back to work that way? So I would also encourage to look at the nature of the role. So many roles have changed the location of where they can be performed, and there may be opportunities for shielding employees to do some of those remote roles and continue to be safe.
Yeah, thanks both. I think the next question is probably on a similar vein. It's just slightly more general. It's where an organisation has got a mix of employees, some who are probably really very reluctant to come back to the workplace for health worries and for other worries, and then you've got another group of people who are kind of itching to get back. They're struggling working from home. Perhaps Anne, how should organisations manage that? Do they just need complete flexibility, or is there sort of good advice you can give?
So that's a really interesting question, and we have actually broken out the results of our workplace happiness survey generationally, and there's some interesting findings there. The happiest people working from home are the baby boomers. And actually, the Gen Xers are also pretty happy, even those that have children, although I do acknowledge that there are burdens created by that. Those that tend to be least happy are the younger workers, millennials. And that's often because, especially in urban cities, they can't afford nice places to live. They may be working from home in a tiny flat, maybe with roommates that they realize they don't really like that much, and not have adequate workspaces. And I think it's important to to look at who exactly it is that is not enjoying the work from home experience, and And most employers, the good ones, are consulting employees and giving them a choice. So for example, the CEO of a major food company, his factories have been running all the time, but he's now reopened his office, but he is not making people go to the office. He is saying, if you would like to go to the office, you can go to the office, and I have made it safe. It's very important to note what Sue said. They need to understand that, you know, there's a lot of things you can't do in the office that you used to be able to do, and you still have to social distance, right? So, you know, they do have to be mindful that things have changed. But I think the more enlightened employers are giving the employees some element of choice in what they want to do and how they want to do it.
That's great, thank you. We've got quite a lot of questions coming in around working from home. So I know we've touched on this. Perhaps Sue, maybe from your experience, where obviously there's been in many countries there's been mass working from home during the lockdown period, but as that lockdown reduces and more people are probably going to be working from home for a longer period of time and more regularly, what's your view on ensuring that an organisation supports them from an ergonomic safety point of view? Have you got any experience or any good advice from the co-op or what you're doing around that?
Well, we are looking at ergonomics really seriously now, and because there is an acceptance that colleagues prefer to work at home in a lot of cases, and productivity has been higher as well. Though there are colleagues who want to do that blend again because they're finding it just a bit too challenging looking at the four walls, I think. So we are looking at things like how we provide the right desktop equipment. We're even looking at furniture, for example, for colleagues who are struggling, you know, and what we've done is completely change our learning for display screen equipment. So we're going to be asking everyone to redo their learning for their display screen equipment regulations, because that will help us to pick up on what kind of challenges we've got for helping people to go back. In terms of their mental health well-being, that messaging has been strong, as I said, throughout, and that's going to continue. So some of the challenges are, for example, if you're working at home, how do you stop working? How do you make sure there's a real, there's that cut-off point when your home becomes your home again? How do we encourage people to take holidays? Because, well, I'm not going anywhere, what's the point? But it's even more important in these times that you separate out your home life from your work life. And we're encouraging colleagues, if they're working on a dining room table, pack it up at the end of the day so you're not staring at it, or you'll never switch off. So that messaging has had to continue. It's making that break is really key.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I agree with everything. And the other thing I would say is more and more companies are providing home equipment allowances. Some do that by providing a sort of set shop, because the employer has a duty of care to select sturdy equipment, right? And so my advice is actually you do need to vet the work from home equipment of your employees and make sure that it is safe and fit for purpose. So by having a proactive hand in selecting the equipment and making sure that it is properly installed, and you can do that virtually, do a home working assessment, that's becoming more and more common. The other thing that people are doing is, for the younger people, or indeed any colleagues that want to meet up, is allowing sort of virtual get-togethers that take place with social distancing, preferably outdoors, for employees that want to meet up as teams or to see colleagues, perhaps in a social context. So those sort of virtual picnics, or whatever you want to call them. And I think that's the other thing that can be done to help deal with those employees that are feeling isolated and just really do feel the need to meet up with other colleagues.
Absolutely. I think we've all seen examples of various events that used to be done face to face and are now doing via Zoom or other video conferences. And I think people are becoming more inventive by the week in how they do that, which is great to see. We've probably got time for a couple more. I've got a question here from Kieran, who rightly talks about the group of workers who actually haven't had any choice over the key workers, or those who've been in the workplace all the way through the pandemic, and the extent to which the organisations should be supporting them, and the suggestion that if a worker isn't obeying the physical distancing for whatever reason, it might be a slip of mind or something, that organisations are using fairly hard and disciplinary processes on that to gain better compliance, which seems to me to be obviously not the way that organisations should follow it. I don't know either you've got any experience within your own workforce of that, or any advice to carry on around that issue.
Well, I have spoken with several leaders in the food industry who, again, have been experiencing huge increases in demand. So the head of one global food company told me that she was selling 10 times her forecast, just to give you an idea of the dimensionalization. And those people have been working flat out. And again, the companies that are putting the employee front and center, their well-being, their safety, giving reward and recognition. Private companies, many have given financial recognition to these key workers over the period in the form of bonuses. And that is absolutely right. They are experiencing increased demand. They should recognize those employees, really putting the procedures and the kit in place to keep them safe on the front line, whether that's the screens or the hygiene procedures or the PPE. That is so important. Slowing down production lines, simplifying ranges, all of those steps really do need to be taken. And I think that the notion that somebody that forgets, and then education, right? So, and frequent announcements over tannoy systems, right? Remember your social distancing, all of those steps. Companies that take that approach to supporting workers will be far more rewarded than companies who use the stick. Using the stick in a crisis is not a good idea in the enlightened management view.
I agree.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks, Anne.
Yeah.
Let's have a look what else we've got. We've got a question. This is an interesting one. So it's obviously the risk. There's always a risk of people in the workplace transmitting the disease if they come, particularly, well, if they're asymptomatic, they won't know, but if they've got symptoms. And the question around how we manage workers who desperately want to come to work to deliver for their customers and probably don't really understand the risk that they're putting in place if they're coming into the workplace with some of the symptoms. And I'm sure we've all seen that situation. How have you gone about dealing with that? Perhaps, Sue, you might want to talk to that one.
Well, every individual business has had to deal with this separately, but to be honest, it hasn't been a massive issue for us, I think, because our messaging has been really clear. And I think because of we've been very generous with our rewards, we've been very generous with our packages for colleagues isolating. We've had hardly any colleagues going through the furlough scheme, but again, they've done so on full pay. So we haven't had to worry about that, because I think the colleagues have felt that they felt secure and that their job is secure, and that they didn't need to rush back. Again, it's all been about the messaging, and all of our messaging has been very top heavy in terms of making sure our key workers feel supported first and recognizing that those are the ones on the front line. And so it hasn't been a big issue for us. I think I'm pleased to say that when Anne was saying about the good things you need to do, that we've been ticking all of those boxes. So it hasn't been a major issue for us.
Thanks, Sue. I'm going to just try and squeeze one more in because we've got so many in the last minute. I might just ask you on this, Anne. So we've talked a lot about mental health. We've talked about working from home and mental health. And what advice would you give around the support that organisations can provide to their employees around mental health when working from home?
Well, I think you've heard a lot of it in the tips you've heard on this webinar. So making sure that you have boundaries, as Sue was saying, that you do not work all hours, making sure that you step away from the screen, that you go out for a walk, that you actually interact with your children if they need you and say, excuse me, I'll be right back. I just have to, you know, sort my 3-year-old out if they're not on your lap. So making sure that you give employees that flexibility and that humanness. My biggest advice for protecting mental health is manage with a human face, because that is what is so important. Asking, how are you feeling today? Being attuned to changes in colleagues, you know, and it's okay for colleagues not to feel top of the world every day. This is a crisis. There are going to be days when we feel flat, saying it's okay to have a bad day. You know, maybe take a day or 2 off to recharge your batteries. Very important. So that sort of advice. And then of course there is the more structured training. There are mental health and well-being seminars and apps and technologies and the experts that people are bringing in. There's a lot of structured training as well, but I think the managing with a human face and a human touch is probably one of the best things we can all do for each other's mental health.
Thanks, Anne. I think that's a fantastic way of ending the Q&A session. What a great message to finish with. So we are coming to the end of the session now. Before we finish, I would like to remind you that IOSH has its own COVID-19 resources page as well, which the details are now coming up on the screen. And I think Ben's also put a bit of some of the links in the chat for you. This will also be included in the post-webinar webpage, and again the link is there on your screen. So just to finish, just a reminder, this is a series of webinars. So our Thursday webinars, we hold them every week. So do please keep an eye out for on our COVID-19 webinar page and other IOSH channels, all of our social media, about the details for our next webinar. And finally, I'd like to thank every single one of you for participating today. We've had over 350 people on the webinar. And I'll also end by saying that we'll send you all a link to the recording via email. So please look out in your inbox over the next 24 hours. And of course, I want to once again thank Anne and Sue for some absolutely fantastic presentations, some great answers to the questions, some really, really important messages that we can all take away. So thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Please take care and stay healthy.